All right, I'm going to go over a bunch of different terms and meanings here, and this isn't to insult your intelligence. I just want to make sure we all have the same basis of understanding before we move forward. Introducing the classic semi-auto striker-fired pistol. You can notice there's no exposed hammer here, which generally sets it apart as a striker-fired pistol. All right, let's go over the big parts first. This lower plastic portion is called the frame. This is what the slide rides on top of. The frame is also sometimes called the lower receiver, and the slide is also sometimes called the upper receiver. The frame is composed of the trigger guard, the grip, which is the portion of the firearm that your hand holds onto, the back strap, which means that this is called the front strap, the tang, also sometimes referred to as the beaver tail. This front portion here is sometimes referred to as the dust cover. This particular firearm has a rail on it, which accepts some lights and lasers, and you can even put some dry fire tools on it. Inside the frame of your pistol, you're going to find your trigger, the magazine release, which allows the magazine to fall freely out of the firearm. And now that the magazine is out, we can see the magazine well. This is where the magazine inserts into the gun and feeds bullets into the chamber. You can see on this firearm there's a little bit of a flare at the bottom. You can get larger magazine wells which aid in loading the firearm. Your takedown pin or takedown levers, which will allow you to disassemble your firearm. Your slide lock or slide release lever. Both of those terms are used interchangeably, but also with great animosity against the other users. The reason why there's two terms for this lever is because this little notch right here in the slide can lock the lever and also release it. You'll see as I push the slide to the rear, that notch comes above the slide lock lever, and I can push the lever up to lock the slide in place. Then, once the slide is locked in place, I can push downwards on the lever to relieve the tension on the slide and send it forward, like so. Now let's do a flipperoo. Holy crap, this gun is ambidextrous. The slide lock lever / slide release lever has appeared on the other side, and the magazine catch, which is sometimes also another word for the magazine release, is also reversible. You can see my trigger is also on the other side. What we can see that's different on this side of the pistol is this cutout here in the slide. That is called the ejection port. The ejection port is where the casings are going to extract from and come flying out of the firearm. On most firearms, the ejection port is set up on the right side of the firearm. This is mostly carrying over from the rifle platforms, where the shell casings would be hitting the shooter in the face if they were on the left side. That's if you're a right-handed shooter. This area here is also referred to as the action. This is the moving parts of the firearm that loads, fires, and ejects the cartridges, and then reloads and fires and continues firing. Pulling the slide rearward and locking it is referred to as opening the action or leaving the action open. The extractor is a little claw that grabs onto the rim of the casing and pulls it out of the chamber when the firearm's done shooting it. On the slide, you'll also see these little grooves cut out. These are called serrations. You have rear and front serrations. Nowadays, you're seeing front serrations showing up more often, but more commonly, the serrations are found on the rear of the slide. These are to help you grab and manipulate the slide rearwards. On the top of this firearm, there's some iron sights. We have a front iron sight and a rear iron sight. Both of these need to be aligned to assist us in aiming the pistol. This block that we're seeing inside the ejection port is a piece of the barrel. Now that the slide is locked to the rear, we can see the barrel of the firearm as well as the recoil spring. We can also see straight through the magazine well because there's no magazine inserted. And now there is. We can also get a better look at the extractor, which is that claw, and this little piece right here is called the ejector. After the extractor pulls the spent casing out of the chamber, which is the rearmost portion of the barrel, this casing flies into the ejector, which sends it bouncing out of the firearm. We can see here the recoil spring, the barrel. The hollow portion of the barrel is referred to as the bore. The diameter of the bore is what determines the caliber of the firearm. The caliber tells the shooter what round the firearm is designed to shoot. The caliber of this barrel is 9mm. You can see from the stamp on top of the barrel, 9x19. You can also see the grooves inside the barrel, which are referred to as rifling. The rifling assists with spinning the bullet in travel and keeping it stable. You can also see that the rearmost portion of the barrel has a smooth surface. This is referred to as the chamber, and it is where the round will rest until fired. This slanted portion of the barrel is referred to as the feed ramp, and it's what assists the rounds into the chamber. Inside the firearm, the magazine will be pushed up against the feed ramp, and the slide will push the uppermost bullet in the magazine into the chamber of the barrel. And now the firing pin. This is the small piece that is going to make contact with the primer of the round and ignite it. As you can see on this pistol, I'm using that accessory rail up on the front, and I have a different sighting system. This is called an optic, which is just a different way to aim the pistol. You'll also find that most pistols have very similar controls and sometimes similar parts. For instance, the magazine release lever and slide lock slide release lever have to be in distance of our thumb to be able to actuate, so you're often going to find them in the same place no matter what firearm you're using. You will find some manufacturers trying out different controls, such as the magazine release being down on the back strap of the firearm, or a paddle release which is built into the trigger guard, but generally speaking, for a magazine release on a pistol, you're looking for a button right next to the trigger guard. The slide lock lever basically works the same on every pistol. We pull the slide to the rear, look for that notch, and push up on the lever to lock it in place. When we want to send the slide forward, we simply push down. You'll notice when the slide went back and then forward, we now have this little piece jutting out. This is called the hammer, because this is a hammer-fired pistol. Meaning that in theory, if there was no other safeties built into this pistol, I could depress the trigger and fire the pistol by letting go of the hammer. This is also a single action pistol because the trigger is not cocking the hammer on its own. I have to either manually manipulate the hammer to press the trigger, or I have to allow the slide to cycle and push the hammer back. This piece here is called a safety lever or external safety. There's many internal safeties built into modern pistols, but some pistols do still have an external safety, especially when they're hammer fired. The safety is placed on by pushing upwards into the groove on the slide, which now stops the slide from going rearward or forward. This will often also disallow the trigger from being released. On this pistol, you can also see a piece here on the back strap, which goes in and out. This is called a grip safety. The theory behind this is that the grip safety is to be depressed by the web of your hand for the trigger to also be depressed. On this pistol, you can again see that the controls are in very similar locations, but that we have one added piece up here on the slide. This is called a decocker. This is for when the hammer is to the rear. I can push this lever down, which then sends the hammer to a safer position in the pistol, sometimes half-cocked, sometimes fully uncocked. Let's go through a quick slideshow here so you can identify the parts of the pistol as we're going through and see how similar they are across all the different manufacturers. Now in this course we won't be using revolvers, but you can see a few similarities here again with the iron sights, hammer, and trigger, but instead the magazine is called a cylinder and it's right up here. With each press of the trigger, the cylinder rotates, which sends a new round into the chamber. What you can see on this firearm is a double action trigger. That means that the trigger on the firearm is cocking the hammer and releasing the hammer when it reaches the breaking point. I can also pull the hammer manually, which puts the trigger into single action mode, meaning it's no longer doing double action, pulling the hammer and releasing the hammer. Instead, it's just releasing the hammer. The reason why we won't be covering revolvers in this course is because this is a very different platform from modern semi-autos, and it would cause a lot of conflict with the course material. In addition to that, the revolver has really fallen out of popularity in comparison to the modern semi-autos, and you're not really seeing it as often in competition or in real life context for law enforcement and military. That's not to say that revolvers don't have their benefits to them. They are very accurate and fun to shoot, and they have a zero standoff distance, which some self-defense advocates really appreciate. Zero standoff simply means I can push my muzzle into an object without the slide going out of battery. When the slide is out of battery, I have a dead trigger, and the slide will not allow the firearm to operate. Once the slide is fully forward, I can then use the trigger. On a revolver, because there is no slide pushing the gun out of battery, it can be pressed right up against an object and fired. For those reasons, this is the last time you'll see a revolver in this course, so soak it in. It's a pellet gun. This is an aluminum-cased, copper-plated 9mm 115 grain projectile. The entire thing is called a cartridge, or more commonly referred to as a round. This is what's being actually projected out of the firearm. The casing is the silver portion. This is what remains behind as the bullet leaves the barrel and is ejected out of the firearm. On the bottom of the round is the primer. When the trigger on your firearm is pressed, the firing pin comes forward and strikes the primer. When the primer is struck, it ignites the powder inside the casing, which then launches the projectile out of the barrel. As the bullet leaves the barrel, the pressure sends the slide rearward, which extracts the casing from the chamber and then ejects it from the firearm. Bullet, casing. The primer, when struck, will ignite the powder, which then sends the bullet downrange. You can see that this primer has a small dent or dimple in it, and that is indicating that a firing pin has already struck it and it has already been spent. These are magazines, commonly referred to as mags, which store the rounds until they are ready to be fired. At the top of the magazine is the follower. This is what holds the rounds in place on top of the spring. Sometimes there'll be different colors to assist with identifying that the magazine is empty. If you are right-handed, your right hand is commonly referred to as your firing hand or strong hand. Your left hand will be your support hand or weak hand. Yes, that needed its own category. And now, with that, we're ready to get into this course.